Hello everybody, my name is Alan Murray and welcome to my presentation at Excel Weekend 8. So this is a fabulous event. I'm very pleased to be here and I hope the team over in Brazil are having a cracking time at the in-person part of this event. My presentation though is about the ultimate top N list in Excel. So during this presentation we're going to look at a few progressions of creating a top N list, such as a top 10 or a top 5, or something that may be specified by the user. Now, there are a variety of ways of creating such a list. We're going to focus on formulas in this session, but even with Excel formulas, there are many ways that you may see somebody create such a list. Whether they use a function like rank or count ifs or filter. These are common methods and I'm going to take my own personal approach, which we'll chop and change with to see some different variations of what is possible, and then you can decide what is an ultimate version. So a few quick things about me. My name is Alan Murray and I'm the founder of Computer Gaga. That is my YouTube channel, my blog, and anything that I do online. You can find links in this file, as you can see on screen, to connect with me on LinkedIn or via YouTube. I'm also the author of a few books, but the primary two being my Advanced Excel series, Advanced Excel Success, and Advanced Excel Formulas, which came out only a few weeks ago. So it was natural that I would do a formula session here today. Okay, let's start writing some formulas. So let's begin by creating a top 10 list. And this top 10 list will be using the data on the left hand side, which is a table named points. And we want to generate 3 columns. We want a column with the ranking number, such as number 1, 2, 3, etc., up to 10. Then we want the name of the person and also how many points they scored. And this list will be ranked in descending order by points. The more points you have, the higher ranking you have. So let's start by creating the rank column, numbers 1 to 10. And to do this, I'm going to start by doing it manually. And as mentioned, we're going to progress through this presentation into more dynamic solutions. But for now, I'm going to type number 1 in there. I'm going to select that cell and the number adjacent to its right, and then fill that down until I generate numbers 1 to 10. So that should be that. And there's my numbers 1 to 10. I'm now going to generate the points in a descending order. So the top 10 points, if you will. To begin with, I'm going to use the sort function. So as I mentioned in the introduction, there's many ways of creating these top 10 lists, but my primary focus in this presentation will be to look at the sort functions and also filter. These two will be the heartbeat of these rankings. I have over the years used various methods, and my courses that I do on sports rankings for the league tables are typically a bit more intense because we have multiple conditions going on as to determine those rankings. So sort function, I'm going to select the points column from the table there, which looks a bit funny, points. Remember, the table is named points, and then that column also happens to be called points right now. I'll put a comma to move on to the sort index question. Now there's only one column in this array, so I'm going to put another comma just to bypass that unnecessary question, and then specify -1 for a descending order. Now at the moment, if I close off the bracket and run this function, it's going to sort the points absolutely fine, but it's going to list all of them. Now we only want the top 10. Now there is a function in Excel called choose rows, which will be perfect for this task right now, really. But I'm going to do things a little bit different. I'm going to use the index function because I'm such a fan of this function. I still tend to use that a little bit more than the functions such as choose rows and choose cols, which we probably will see a little bit later in this presentation. For now though, I'm going for index, so coming back to that first formula, and I'm going to put index at the beginning of it, then skip to the end of the sort function, so that sort function's returning the array, put in a comma to bring me to the row number question. So what row are we returning? Well, I want 10 rows, the first 10 rows. So I'm going to bring in a function called sequence and give that 10 rows. So that will simply generate the sequence of values 1 to 10, similar to what I manually did in range F6 to F15 a moment ago. Another closed bracket for index there, and running this will give us only the top 10 of those descending point totals. Now it's the turn to do a similar thing for the names, but the names, the order of them, will be determined by the points. So we're going to use a function here called sort by, so that we can actually sort an array, the array of names, by an array outside of its scope. So using this, the array to sort is the list of names. If I just select those, put in the comma, what is the array we're sorting by? Okay, well that's the points column. Comma, and the order is -1. So can we sort the names in descending order, but using the points column as the array to sort by? Closing this off will behave very similar to before. I've now got the top 10 names, but I've also got a load of excess names as well. So index again to the rescue to cut that list at number 10. So coming back to the first cell, and we're essentially recreating what I did a moment ago, index, and on the end of it, comma sequence, number 10, close off a couple of brackets. So although functions like choose rows would be great right now, I guess I'm stuck in my ways in some sense with index, but index is much more versatile and a better function to know. Pressing enter, you've got the top 10. So that is our first example of a top 10, a perfectly adequate scenario. There is your top 10. But we will start moving through some progressions now. So the next progression is that we're going to make that n dynamic. This is a top 10, but I want the user to specify in cell F3 whether this is top 5, top 10, top 3, and so on. So let me begin by entering a sample value in cell F3. If I enter 5 in there to specify the top 5 records, and now it's just a case of editing 3 ranges to refer to that cell. We have the 2 spill ranges in the name and points columns, and then we've got the rank values, which previously was done manually by me using the fill technique. So let's start with those rankings. If I just come and delete the values, because we've now seen the sequence function be used with index. So it shouldn't be a surprise that we can use that sequence function in this cell to create that fill of the rank values instead of using that manual approach. For the rows to return, I will specify the value in cell F3, and I'll close that off and run it. So that will simply return those ranking values. But this is dynamic. If the value in F3 was to change to 8, I'll get the top 8, 10 is the top 10, and I'll put that back to 5. I can now just edit the sequence functions in each of the name and points spill ranges to behave in the same way. I'll edit cell G6, change that sequence 10 to refer to F3, and I'll do the same for cell H6 here, the number 10 to F3, And now to see it in action, changing that for the top 8, returns 8 and 5 back to the top 5. So we now have our dynamic top n rankings. The next progression is to start to reduce the number of formulas used. And instead of using a separate formula for each column, I want to look at reducing this into one formula for the top n rankings. Okay, so I'm going to delete the values from each of the two spill ranges, and in cell G6 I'm going to use the sort function. So previously we had two spill ranges, points using sort and name using sort by, and this is interesting to see, but ultimately I want to reduce the number of formulas. So going for the sort function out of the two to return both columns. Now I want this to be dynamic, so I'm going to use a function called choose_cols to specify which columns I want. I will refer the choose_cols function to the points table, but then use the match function to dynamically fetch the columns to return from the headers in the cells directly above. So I'll tell the match function to match the values in cells G5 and H5 to the values in the headers row of the points table. Let me just choose the headers row there, and comma 0 for an exact match. If I close the match function and the choose_cols function, this brings us back to sort, where now I'm going to specify to sort by column 2 of that returned array. So points in this case, because choose_cols is returning the name column and the points column. So the second column, oh, just realised I haven't got a comma in there, the second column, and then -1 for descending. So if I run this function as it is, this will return both columns and ordered in descending order by column 2. So these are the same results as previously, with the exception of I still need to add in index to return only the top n. So coming back to cell G6, let's move up to the formula bar and I'll add in index. Let me put the sort function on its own line, jump to the end, comma, another new line, and for how many rows and how many columns to return. Now the number of rows is the same as before, sequence function that refers to cell F3. But for the number of columns, this time I want to return 2. So I want columns 1 and 2. So I'm going to use a sequence function for that 2. That will ask me how many rows. I'm going to ignore that question with a comma. And then how many columns, that will be 2. Close off sequence. I'll close off the index function right there as well. This, with the two sequence functions for the dynamic series, 1 to 5 for the rows, or whatever specified in F3, and then 1 to 2 for the columns. And now I've returned it in a single formula, but this formula is also dynamically referring to the headers. So if I was to change the value in H5 from points to votes, then I've now actually got the top 5 dependent on the number of votes received. I can now change that back to points. So that's pretty cool, reducing it to one formula. And we're going to take that a step further next and include the rank in that formula too, but also making it dynamic in the columns that are returned and the columns that it is ordering the rankings by. So to include the rank column in that, let me just come and resize this formula bar, as I'm going to need a little bit more room for this one. And we're going to start this all over again. So if I just delete all of the values, and from that rank cell, cell F6, I'm going to begin with a function called let. The let function is fantastic. It allows us to create more meaningful formulas breaking different calculations into manageable chunks, and also increasing the efficiency of the calculations of that formula. Now I'm going to create some name value pairs here. So I'm going to begin with the name of rank. So we can call these to some extent whatever we want. I'm deciding to name it rank. And I'm going to give this the value or the calculation of that sequence function. That sequence function that refers to cell F3 to know what the n value is. Is it top 5? Is it top 10? So on. I'll put in my comma and I'll now create another name. So that's my rankings. Next up, I want to know the order of them. So I'm going to name this one order. And this is going to be the calculation we did a moment ago with the sort, choose cols, and match combination. So let's put that in again. Sort, choose cols. We're going to look at the points table. And then I'm going to use a match function that's going to match the headers from cells G5 and H5 to the header row of the points table. Exact match. Let's close off choose cols. We're then going to sort that by the second column of that returned array and in descending order. I'll close that off, and that's the second name. So those two formulas from before, the one that generated the rankings and the one that returned the two columns in order, have now been assigned the names of rank and order. I'm now going to bring in the calculation that used index to specify only the top n. I'm going to name this one name points. Remember, you can name these what you wish. You may disagree with my naming. And this is going to be the index function. And now I can refer to the previous names. And that's what makes this a more meaningful formula when you start getting familiar with the use of let. So when it prompts me for the array, I'm going to feed it the name order. Yeah, so that previous name that was created. And you can see it appear in the list as I type. Comma. How many rows? Well, for that I can refer to the rank name, because that will tell me how many rows there are. That has got the sequence function, referring to cell F3. And then for how many columns, I will just enter that sequence function before. Now, I could have assigned a name for that as well, and many people may have, and called it number columns or something. But I'm just going to enter this in here. It was such a small function, so I'm going to put comma 2, close off sequence, and then close off index, comma, and then the final argument of let will need to be the calculation. And for this, I'm going to use a function called hstack, a horizontal stacking function. And I'm going to ask this function to stack the rank column to the name points column. So what I'm really doing here, when we think back to the previous formulas on the sheet, when I had the two different calculations, the ranking and then sort that was returning the two columns, I'm really using hstack to combine the two into one formula. And I'm using let just to break down this formula into kind of 3 separate chunks before I use hstack to combine them. If I close hstack, and then I'm also going to close the let function, I could resize this just for one more row, because typically that last bracket would be on its own line, just so we can see that it's paired up with let at the start of the formula. And if I press enter, we now have one formula that is returning this top n rankings list. If I change the value in F3 to the top 10, then I get the top 10. And if I change it to 5, I will get the top 5. So that is a cool dynamic top n list. But let's have a look at another approach. And then you can decide what you prefer and what you would consider the ultimate top n list. In this next list, we are going to handle the tied values. We can see in ranking number 2 and 3 of the previous list for Celia and Jose that they're both tied on 90. And maybe that's the better approach. But let's put those both as ranking number 2 because they are tied, so it seems somewhat unfair for Jose to get position 3 when he's actually tied on position 2 really. Now for this approach we'll start in the same way as previous. In cell J6 we will use the sequence function to reference the cell above with the top n number in, and that will generate our dynamic list of rankings. But then skipping over to the points column, we want a distinct list of the points. So I don't want 90 in there twice like the previous list. I want each points total just to feature once, and then we can mention all the names who achieve that points tally in the same cell of the name column. So skipping over to points in cell L6, we're going to use the unique function to give us that list of distinct point values. So I'll point this function to the points table, and unfortunately that points column with that name clash again. And I'm just going to run the unique function in its classic use here. No requirements for the additional arguments. And that will list each of the points values mentioned in that column. Next, we're going to sort them in descending order, and then we will use the index function as we have previously to only show the top n values. So coming back to it, let's get in there and apply the sort function. And with this sort function, no need to mention the sort index as we have just this single column. But for the sort order, that will be descending -1. And that's our second iteration of that formula. They're now in order. And finally, we'll go in and add the index. So index. And for the number of rows, this will be a reference to the spill range of the rankings. So J6 and then the hash to access the spill range, and we'll close all this off. So by referencing the ranking values there, the index function will only put across that first row from the sort array, and then the second one, and then the third one, and so on. So pressing enter, we have what we want. And if I changed the top n value in cell J3 to 8 or to 10, then we can see that those two columns at the moment, as I bring it back to 5, are dynamic. Now for the name column, and we want to combine all of the names who achieve that total in a single cell. So the two functions we're going to use here are filter and text join. So text join is fantastic for handling arrays in modern Excel, an improvement from the old concatenate techniques with the function or with the ampersand. So starting off with filter here, if I bring in the filter function, the array we're filtering is the points table and name column. I want to filter and return the names, and the criteria is going to be the points table, and it needs to be that the points column is equal to the value in the adjacent cell, which is L6. Now we won't be referencing the spill range here because filter won't allow that. So we're going to fill the formula down when we're finished. But in a scenario like this, although we've been working dynamically so far, we are working on the idea that the user is going to specify the top 3 or top 5 or top 10, and probably not much more than that. We don't need this huge list of values. I will put in an if empty argument so that we do not get the calc error returned. If there is a blank in the points column, which there will be when we copy this down. And that is the filter function so far. Running this will tell me that Elena is number 1. And if I drag this down to, I'm going to drag it down maybe, I'm just going to drag it down a whole bundle for now, I think. What cell am I in here? L20, oh sorry, K20. And I'll get this. So I'm getting some results. We can see most interesting here that Gerson has moved from position 4 to position 3 in this new list, and Tanya has come from 5 to 4. But I've also got a couple of spill errors where there are multiple names to return. So Celia and Jose, as we know from previous. And then we've also got one coming in position 5 there. We'll find out who they are as we go and fix this with text join. So coming back to position 1 for the name, and I'm going to wrap text join around this. The delimiter, I'm going to opt for a comma followed by a space. No need for the ignore empty argument. And then for the text values, that's what filter is returning. So skipping to the end and closing off text join. No change for Elena there. But as I drag that down to K20 again, then we get the results that we want. So now we do have Celia and Jose tied in position 2, and it turns out to be Bill and Ken tied in ranking number 5 there. If I change the top end to maybe the top 10, then that does grow. We can see Cristiano and Jacek in position 6 tied. Fantastic. So that is our final top N example here. So you pick what you think is the ultimate list. There are so many different ways to create these top N lists, and many opinions on how we should handle things like tied values. So I hope you found my presentation useful. Please connect with me on LinkedIn. You can come and find me on YouTube if you like my content. And if you enjoy the formulas, then check out my new book, Advanced Excel Formulas, which is over 800 pages, over 500 formula examples. Thank you for the team for inviting me to present here today. Excel weekend number 8. Absolutely awesome. Thank you very much. Take care all.